Well, hello and welcome to Humanities 135 Appreciation of Cinema. Mike Carlucci here, your instructor for this session. And we're going to be talking about the film industry and the history and current condition. We're going to talk about what's all entailed into this great course I have here. But in a twist direction, we are joined by my good colleague, my good friend. He's a media mogul, media rep, if you will. His name is Gary Butterworth. Gary, we're going to turn the direction to you. You're going to talk to me about what this class will be all about for this particular session. Gary, welcome and take it away, my friend.
You're very kind, Mr. Carlucci, Professor Carlucci. Gary Butterworth here, delighted to join you on this amazing sort of preview of this class coming up. You know, I took a similar course a few semesters ago, maybe 100 semesters ago, when the technology wasn't as good and the instructor did not have the personality that you have. I actually learned to appreciate the art of film in that class, and your students are in for a real treat. I think you and I grew up watching the movies, so it wasn't a matter of learning how to love the movies as much as learning kind of, you know, the old expression is learn how the sausage is made, as they say. And I actually appreciate film more knowing how it's made. It hasn't really diminished it at all for me. So it's still magic every time I see a film. Well, Mike, you and I are here together. I feel like I've got a milk dud right here that I'm gonna put in my mouth while we're watching movies. There's actually a movie playing right behind me here. If you're not familiar with this old black and white classic silent, this is The Scarlet Letter right behind me here. Maybe a story that some of your students actually read in a literature class, perhaps at the school where they're attending right now. I really literally cannot imagine life without the movies. Can you?
Oh, not at all. In fact, I have a little picture you're going to see right here. There it is. And you're going to see that there. Yeah, it's a shot that it says, it was a quote from, we think it was Charlie Chaplin, but somebody put there, you can see it says Charlie Chaplam. Like they don't want to give him full credit.
Well, as we get underway, we have so much material to cover, Mike, as you know, so I'm going to get right into it here if I can. And I'd like to begin really at the beginning, which is motion picture history. Where do we start? Going way back to the beginning.
Well, we go, Gary, from point A to point Z, if you will. We'll talk, if it's not Thomas Edison, we'll have Leland Stanford, Edward Muybridge. We got the Lumiere brothers. We're going to talk about all kinds of their inventions and how their creations. Talk about all the films they got involved with, it be Europe or United States, South America, Asia. We'll be talking about all that stuff, all the history of it. George Millet, Fritz Lang. We'll keep it going. We got so much to cover. D.W. Griffith, of course. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, it's going to be tough, but we can do it. We get them all encased and we shove it in. It'd be a 16-week course or an 8-week course. Doesn't matter. We get it all in there. We have fun in this class, and then we get, of course, to all the talent. As you know, all the films are based in Europe and Germany, France, Spain, and made their way into the East Coast of the United States. And of course, they made it to the Southern California, Los Angeles slash Hollywood in the early 1900s. All the motion pictures companies, we talk about that. We talk about Sam Warner, of course, from the Warner Brothers label. And one of your good guys that you like, because I know some of your family was very familiar growing up with Irving Thalberg, the big time guy at MGM, and David O. Selznick. I mean, the list goes on. Louis B. Meyer. Oh, it's tremendous, all this stuff here. All part of the history and the golden age of early cinema.
What a wonderful treat they're going to get in this panoply of great films, the pantheon of the amazing, the art form. It really is an art form, and it really, I think, sort of encapsulates all the various art forms, music, theater, art, all of it together. And so, uh, obviously, you're gonna cover so much information from A to Z, but in a very entertaining way.
But let's talk about some of the big stars like Charlie Chaplin. We had Mary Pickford, the Fairbanks brothers, Douglas Fairbanks, to be inclusive there, Buster Keaton, Lon Chaney Sr. We just cover a lot of the big name actors from the old days, the classic actors to the modern day as well. And we all, of course, like bloopers, right, Gary? We cover,
Yeah, absolutely.
I got some cool vignettes, some classic Hollywood bloopers like the Humphrey Bogarts, Lauren Bacalls, the Robert Mitchums, the list goes on. Edward G. Robinson, Spencer Tracy, even Clark Gable. Some funny bloopers you'll enjoy. We'll have vignettes embedded into the Canvas website.
And let's, if I can now, switch to something that's not really anything really fun at all, but it's part of the reality of Hollywood and film, and that is these great stars, these great actors, really of any era. At the end of the day, they're regular people just like us, and sometimes the pressures get to you. Sometimes circumstances occur that are out of your control. Mike, talk for a moment, if you would, about some of these terrible tragedies too. Absolutely. I mean, I'm just going to throw out a few names here. There's Marilyn Monroe and Errol Flynn and Fatty Arbuckle and James Dean, one of my favorites of all time. You were just sharing with me how early he died in his life, and he made four or five of the best movies that have ever been put on cinema. So how do you handle those?
Well, all those films you mentioned from James Dean, who, by the way, passed away from that terrible car crash up in Central California at the age of 24. Yeah, all those films he was in, they were all award winners or award nominees for the Academy Award. I mean, just tragic. He was at the peak of his popularity. And he never got a chance to see any of his films.
Oh,
Yeah, because he did like two, mustered in about 6 or 7 months worth of filming, and the tragedy happened. And like I said, Fatty Arbuckle will go, at least 3 decades before, and Fatty Arbuckle was very popular, one of the highest paid comic actors, part of the Keystone Cops. He was arrested, and they tried to convict him for murder, and he was acquitted like 4 or 5 times. They kept taking this thing to court, ruined his career. He wasn't in good health anyway, and of course, he passed away very young, got hooked on alcohol. And Marilyn Monroe, of course, very famous actress, pinup girl, the first, I guess, official sex symbol, if you will, passed away tragically. Kind of a mystery still. Did she OD? Did she commit suicide? Was she murdered? Always a big mystery.
well, one of the things I think your students are really going to enjoy. I'm going to talk to you, kind of dad to dad, because we both have kids. And I remember talking to my son once a couple of years ago, and he's in his late 20s now, and I asked him about some of these classic films that he hasn't seen, but oddly enough, he knows some of the dialogue because of some of the stuff they send up, like on Saturday Night Live and so forth. But he hasn't actually seen the films. And I think what's going to happen is your students are going to see these films and go, "Oh, so that's what Casablanca is all about. That's what that line is from." So, I mean, they're really in for a treat. There are so many holiday legends of the past. I don't even know where to begin. You've mentioned a few already. Many genres as well, many blockbuster films.
Yeah, Gary, we're going to get all the pioneers, either the actors, actresses, directors, producers, Edwin S. Porter, D.W. Griffith, Fritz Lang, which I mentioned earlier, George Millet, Carl Laemmle, Adolf Zukor, Thomas Ince. I mean, and some of the great actor legends, the pioneers in the silent film era, Lon Chaney Sr., Charlie Chaplin, Rudolph Valentino, Pickford, I mentioned earlier, Keaton, Harold Lloyd. What are your favorite guys? Al Jolson, Shirley Temple, and all the fabulous films like Birth of a Nation, Great Train Robbery from Edwin S. Porter, Wizard of Oz, Casablanca, Grapes of Wrath, Citizen Kane from the great Orson Welles. Clark Gable, Cary Grant, Spencer Tracy, Bogey, James Cagney, Henry Fonda, John Wayne. I mean, all those legends and living legends like Clint Eastwood, Robert Redford, all those guys still with us and still performing and doing great films, even in their 70s, 80s, and some in the 90s. Clint Eastwood just turned 94 here recently. And some of the great actresses of the past: Mae West, Gloria Swanson, Vivian Leigh, Judy Garland, Katharine Hepburn, Joan Crawford, Betty Davis, Liz Taylor, Natalie Wood, Jane Fonda, and a lot of comedy teams will cover the Laurel and Hardys of the world, Marx Brothers of the world. We'll look at Abbott and Costello, the Three Stooges, the Rat Pack. We can't forget about chatting about them in the course. Sinatra, Martin Davis, Ocean's 11, all those guys just had tons of fun. And of course, we mentioned James Dean earlier. We got Sidney Poitier, Jimmy Stewart, Marlon Brando. Though I got a big list. Steve McQueen, all of those guys. Charlton Heston, Rock Hudson. The list is extreme, but we'll cover it all and everybody will have fun. All the info I have on these people, you're going to love.
I don't know how you pulled it off, Professor Carlucci, because in addition to all these stars you're mentioning, which you're covering, I don't know how you get into all the genres on top of that. You got the thriller, you got the film noir, you got the comedies, but somehow you're able to kind of weave all this together into one amazing course. I could actually just look at your website for like 3 weeks and become like completely an expert on film. So there's so much you're going to get into.
Okay, Gary, besides all those great actors and actresses we're going to be chatting about, some of the list, the names I threw at you a little bit here, but we got some great pioneer directors and producers, the Cecil B. DeMille's of the world, John Ford, Orson Welles, Alfred Hitchcock, master of suspense, Francis Ford Coppola, of course, the Godfather trilogy, Martin Scorsese, tons of great films, worked with De Niro and Pesci a lot, Steven Spielberg, of course. Also want to mention the big summer blockbuster, Jaws. That's like the first original big summer blockbuster, made so much money in 1975. It turned Steven Spielberg, who made him a big star, George Lucas, Sidney Pollack, Mel Brooks, Irwin Allen, the list goes on. And we've got Quentin Tarantino, James Cameron, M. Night Shyamalan. These are the more new age directors. We'll be chatting about that as well. And some of the big name actors that became supreme directors and producers in Hollywood for years. Clint Eastwood, who's 94 and still working, got a film just got released recently. Robert Redford, Warren Beatty, Mel Gibson, all of them. Even great European directors, Italian directors like Bertolucci and Leone and Fellini. And we mentioned George Millet earlier and Fritz Lang, but we got Ingmar Bergman, Milos Forman, Wolfgang Peterson. And of course, we'll cover great African-American directors like Spike Lee, Jordan Peele, Barry Jenkins, Tyler Perry. The list goes on. And hey, don't forget about those lady directors either, Gary. They are making all kinds of waves behind the camera. Very good quality films. Chatting about that, got that all on the Canvas website. And believe it or not, we'll throw in some B movie directors who really think he was a bad director, but they consider him a B movie director. But he really created a lot of jobs for some big names like Jack Nicholson, Martin Scorsese, Ron Howard. We're talking Roger Corman. We'll be talking about him. He was more like, I consider him still an A director, but it was just low budget films, But we'll be talking about a guy that they consider a really bad director, worst director in Hollywood, Ed Wood. We'll cover all of him. He's actually got a cult following, and his movies were so bad they consider them C or D movies. And I'm going to get into the genres too, which we're going to cover here in just a bit. But I want to go back to the directors real quick here. I want to compare two guys. Cecil B. DeMille, great classic films. The Ten Commandments, 4.5 hour film. The Greatest Show on Earth, Samson and Delilah, and many others. But here's a guy that had super mega production on his mind all the time. Precise in detail, very meticulous. He would shoot many takes for even easy scenes. He used lots of extras, went way over budget, went way over the time frame, the schedule. Now, Charlton Heston was in a couple of his films, and Charlton Heston said he loved Cecil B. DeMille, but after he did the second film, he goes, I can't work with him again. He burns me out. He does too many takes. The great Charlton Heston has done a lot of great films. Now, let's go to a guy that is the opposite, Clint Eastwood. Now, here's a guy that will shoot the rehearsals and move on. And the actors would get upset, like Tom Hanks worked with the movie Sully, remember? And Tom Hanks goes, there was numerous times Clint would just shoot all the rehearsals. I mean, we're supposed to shoot the film in 4 to 6 months. He got the film done in 3, But that's what Eastwood was about. He would save money. He was under budget all the time. All the production companies, like Warner Brothers and Universal, whoever he was working for at the time, and his own production company, in El Paso, he would save tons of money and make so much money in the profit. But he would shoot the rehearsals. It'd be interesting because I remember a friend of mine was doing stunt work for Clint Eastwood, and they did a rehearsal, and some of the faces of the actors, the look on their face of when they would just do the rehearsal, but Clint would just say, "Okay, let's move on." And the actors were just looking at him like, "What do you mean? That was a rehearsal." Rehearsal was just as good. He kind of did his what you call his Larry David, like, yeah, I'll move on, So anyway, so those are the two difference extremely there with Cecil B. DeMille. But we got all these great directors, the master disaster, Irwin Allen. We'll talk about his films. Mel Brooks, Academy Award-winning director. Talk about all his wild films, politically incorrect, some of them, right? Just a big list of stuff. A lot of fun there with the actors, actresses, and directors. Love this class. I can't wait for everybody to enroll and get it rocking and rolling, man.
You know what? I'm ready to enroll in it myself, just feeding off your enthusiasm. One of the things I think your students will pick up on the way you teach this class is a little something called the auteur theory, when it comes to directors. And what a lot of beginning film students don't understand is you're mentioning all these directors, and it's not like they're just standing behind the camera, just saying, act and take and, cut or whatever. I mean, their fingerprints are over the entire film if it's an auteur. So they're doing everything, and that's a relatively recent phenomena. But you're talking about some of the all-time greats, and so that leads me to our next area here of discussion. Mm-hmm. And how can we not talk about the Academy Awards with the actors, with the directors, the films? How do you handle the Academy Awards in your class?
Well, we go over everything from the first Academy Awards that took place many moons ago. And then we show a lot of some of the, I guess you can say, discrepancies and controversies in some of the films that were chosen for victory, and some of the things that happened. Like recently, was it Will Smith that slapped Chris Rock across the face? And I've got a lot of, we won't call them bloopers, but I guess the word I'm looking for is not really controversy, but I guess you could throw controversy in there as well. But a lot of the weird things that happened during the awards, a lot of these actors and actresses and directors like to get up there and do political messages, and some of the audience reaction was not favorable for some, like the Marlon Brando did not accept his Academy Award for Best Actor from The Godfather. He sent up a Native American woman to accept well, we should say not accept the award, but to disaccept the award. So I got a lot of vignettes and a lot of story information on that. And then the famous faux pas for, I don't know, a couple of years ago or so, when La La Land, which garnered a lot of awards, but it went up for Best Picture, their main award. It was read by accident by Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway. It was someone gave the wrong, an envelope, right? The wrong envelope, and they said La La Land was the Best Picture, but it was incorrect. It was Moonlight as the winner. So that was a famous faux pas, giving the award to the wrong movie. And a couple of nice pages about the Academy Awards, and we'll talk about snubs of the Oscars, the films that should have won, and some that should have been nominated. Here's an example. You and I, of course, love Westerns. Tombstone, which was a great film, came out in 1993. Now, Val Kilmer did an excellent job as Doc Holliday and was not nominated at all. And the reason was, some people said, well, because the nominations came out just before, or some kind of detail that was, it took Val Kilmer out of it, because he did a great job. That was definitely should have been garnered at least a nomination, didn't get it. So there's tons of snubs. I have a big list of all those movies and directors, and even some special effects people that didn't get nominated. We cover that as well, because there's a lot of great films that had some great cinematography and special effects that weren't even thought of as a nomination. So we'll talk about the snubs. Then we'll get into some really fun stuff, talk about green screen magic and all the special effects that go into that, the CG that makes films look, well, we don't want to talk about AI, but AI is kind of included in it now, unfortunately. But it makes appearances, and it saves money for a lot of these films, which are still expensive anyway. But instead of like the Planet of the Apes, the newer ones are now using green screen and motion capture, that kind of thing. So we talk about that as well to make it look as real as possible. Some of these films kind of, you can tell it's a little fakey looking, but it still looks good quality. It depends on what a critic would say, depending on what the movie, the script is, and how it does at the box office. So a lot of stuff, man, a lot of fun stuff. I mean, you can't go wrong. I mean, like I said, there's a lot to cover, and I think everybody will enjoy what we have planned.
Well, I can almost guarantee that. And of course, when you're talking about the movies and film, you're talking about different, kind of epochs of time or eras in our society. And
Mhm.
it's interesting to see how society changes in terms of, what's acceptable, what's not
Mhm.
acceptable, what crosses the line.
Mhm.
And of course, there's this term that, came into use maybe, I don't know, 20 or 25 years ago called political correctness. And
Mhm.
the films even sort of reflect that to some extent too, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of controversy, and to make sure that you know what you're watching and what this film will cover. It'd be a fictional film, or it could be a biography type film, biofilm, or it could be a documentary. And you got to know what's going in before you tell, hey, people, hey, this film is going to be about this. And if it's going to bother you, sensitivity, if you will, then don't watch it. We're at a time now you got to watch what you put on the screen.
Well, one of the most interesting directors and total comedian, of course, is Mel Brooks.
Mm.
And I think back to a time, I have to date myself here. It's been several, if not 4 decades ago. One of the most popular comedies at that time could probably never, ever get made today. And of course, I'm referring to Blazing Saddles.
Mhm.
So what is it like as you examine these films, as you go from one era to another? You've got the Hays Code, and how do you handle all that as the times change?
Well, you did mention the Hays Code, which was very important in early cinema, and we, of course, cover that. Got a nice article written about that, and a nice little small vignette as well. But I tell you, back then, see, nobody really cared. It wasn't bothersome. But now, with all the political madness going on and with social media, it's like I said prior, you got to watch what you say. But those films that came out, like Young Frankenstein, and like you said, Blazing Saddles, and many others. There was a film called with Godfrey Gambridge called The Watermelon Man. Godfrey Gambridge played a white man that turned African American. And the story, it was a comedy, very well liked. Not much controversy about it, but it was just the subject matter. A white man turning black. And if that film was made today, it wouldn't be made. They couldn't do it. People go nuts. But it's called The Watermelon Man, a very good classic comedy. And it didn't get a lot of publicity nor notoriety back then. Now, if someone tried to release a movie like that, oh my goodness, the phone lines would light up, and the social media on X and Facebook, people would go crazy with it. But it just, back then, Gary, nobody cared. It was no big deal. Look at the TV shows out there back at that time too, in the 1970s. All in the Family, The Jeffersons. Tons of TV shows nobody made a big issue about like they do now. You got to watch what you say and do, because you're going to piss somebody off. Bottom line, right?
I think you're right. I mean, it's putting it bluntly, that's pretty much, where we are. And yet
Mhm.
we also think of film as this medium that kind of, breaks tradition and
Right.
brings certain subjects and topics into the public square that wouldn't be there before. So it's that kind of fine line that you have to negotiate. And I know you'll get into all of that. Well, we're
Mhm.
talking about our favorite movies. And of course, every single film you've mentioned,
Mhm.
we could just stop this interview and I could just plop that movie in right now and watch it and enjoy it. They're all so fantastic. But just for giggles and grins, I actually came up with my top 5 favorite films. Now, I'm not saying these are the best films ever made, like cinema, artistically or what have you, but these are just 5 of my favorites. And you tell me when you want me to let you know what they are. Maybe we could hear yours. It'd be interesting to compare the two lists.
Well, let's see your list, or not see it. Let's hear it, and then
Okay.
I'll give you mine.
And these are in no particular order. And if you ask me the same question tomorrow night, I'd probably give you a list with a different 5 films. I just sat down and jotted them down.
Mhm.
So number one, an old film noir classic, Casablanca. You mentioned Bogey and Bacall. That's got to be up near the top of the list. Again, no
Mm.
particular order. The Big Lebowski, the Coen brothers. I'm a huge Big Lebowski fan.
Mhm.
I also happen to love The Third Man with Orson Welles, one of the great
Mm.
film noirs of all time.
Good
One of my
one.
favorite westerns. You mentioned Tombstone. I could easily put that one in here, but I chose The Stagecoach with the Duke, John Wayne, and John Ford, of course, being the famous director of that. And then
Mhm.
finally, this might seem like a strange choice, but it still makes me laugh and had a huge influence on my life. I remember being in high school when it came out. The Odd Couple with Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau.
Love
So those
that
would be my
film.
top 5.
Love that film. Well, I have a top five, but Gary, I've extended it to the top 10. Okay, I have this. I have this in the course, but I will give you it here. It's the Godfather trilogy, number one. And I kind of scatter my favorites. All Sean Connery James Bond films, right? The Mechanic, that's the original with Charles Bronson. 3 Days of the Condor with Mr. Robert Redford and Ms. Faye Dunaway. I got a comedy film in there. I got a couple comedies in here. When Harry Met Sally. It's my wife's favorite as well. Sideways, Paul Giamatti, good film. Casino, Tombstone, Forgetting Sarah Marshall, so hilarious, and The Grand Budapest Hotel. But I do have alternative mentions. West Side Story, the original. A very sad and depressing movie, but I thought it was well written and well produced. Leaving Las Vegas with Nicolas Cage. Five Card Stud. So Five Card Stud with Dean Martin and Robert Mitchum. Jaws. And the original Planet of the Apes. Speaking of Charlton Heston, that was a great film, and these are all originals. And those are my top 10, adding five with the honorable mentions. But
Yeah.
Five Card Stud was a great film. My dad, that was part of it as a child growing up, is going to see films, not just with your buddies, your friends, or on a date, but going with your parents, your father, your brothers and sisters. And I remember my dad took me to Westerns and military films. And, my dad is, we're seeing manly films, military and Westerns and comedies and the musicals. Well, keep that for the girls. Was it back then. I mean, I took free forever, Gary, to see West Side Story and Gone with the Wind and Sound of Music. I didn't see because my dad was, because I grew up with a bunch of sisters. They went to go see with my mom the musicals, and my dad and I went to the shoot 'em ups. So my dad used to call them comedies and things like that. But no, Five Card Stud was one of those that stuck in. I had a great time with my father, and we had just mentioned the great movie Patton, which could actually be now thrown in as a good alternative mention film. Patton was a great film I saw with my dad, and I saw some really movies that you shared, and you asked questions as a kid about the films, and your dad or your mom would kind of fill in the gap, and it was always a learning experience with films. Just the history of it.
It's so true, and it just it draws people in. Like you and I have talked at length, as you say, off camera, about films that our dads like, because you and I are very close to our fathers, and my dad loved westerns just like you, and he loved John Wayne movies, even though he couldn't stand John Wayne as a person because of his politics, but he loved his movies. He felt the same way about war movies. My dad was a World War II veteran, hated war, absolutely couldn't stand it, but he loved watching these Only the Longest Day and some of these amazing war films. So it is fascinating to see how that works. Well, Mike, let's go now from the big blockbuster movies and our top five, five favorites, or top 15, whatever number was you had there.
Yeah.
And let's go down to maybe more on a granular scale. Let's talk a little bit about film production jobs, right? There's more than just the director, right?
Yeah, of course. We cover all the jobs. I have a nice little vignette on that. We cover everything from the producer, the director, the cinematographer, who's considered also the director of photography, the editor. Even we talk about casting directors, what they look for in a film, what the breakdowns are for particular character roles. We talk about lead actors and co-stars, featured actors, extras, background, the whole thing, stunt people. And we talk about also, besides the film position jobs, the behind the scenes people like the grips and the best boy and the guys that carry all the electricity and all the lighting, if you will. Cover all that stuff as well. And we talk about distribution of films, Gary, as well, of how the theaters put their meetings together with the investors and the distribution companies, how to properly display the films, the movies for the big screen, or even going straight to DVD or Netflix or HBO and Amazon Prime and all the other film cable outlets. And we talk about how to promote a film to an idea, a script, a treatment. We talk about that. We talk about some of the websites of film importance like VarietyMagazine.com, The Hollywood Reporter, IMDb.com, which is a superb historical and current condition information website about all the great films. Because sometimes people watch films, hey, who starred in that one film? It was with so and so, and I can't remember that actor's name, or who was the director. Well, you go on IMDb.com and you go right in there. But mainly those three I mentioned: Variety Magazine, Hollywood Reporter, IMDb.com. Those are considered the Bibles of the film industry, from the old and the new, current condition. We talk about, like I said, I did mention treatments here prior, people putting their storylines together and getting their information so they can put a film script together. You got to get a literary agent. We talk about dailies, how the producers and directors and some of the actors, editors get together and go over what they shot for the day and make sure they need to reshoot something or something they missed. And we talk about how TV expanded the film business. When TV came about in the late 40s, early 50s, how they were able to show films on a nightly basis to promote films. What's a film before TV? It's on the screen there and then it disappears for a long time. So the TV kind of rejuvenated and rebirthed some of those classic films. Talk about double features and how drive-in theaters were a big thing back in the old days and how film companies had to do all these different promotions to compete with television. 3D, remember 3D films? We'll talk about that.
Mhm.
And then going back to some of the things that are important, post-production, things done after a film is completed filming, but now you got to add all the ADR. Sometimes editors have to go into a film and maybe cut something and something that's cut too tight. They got to add something. So they got to not just reshoot something, but they can actually grab some sound in post-production and add it to it, make it sound clear. Because sometimes when they're recording an actor, like if it's an outside scene, a location shot, maybe there's a jet that went by that they didn't hear, but it's taken away from the dialogue of the actors. So they have to bring the actors back in to an ADR studio, which is called additional dialogue recording. That's what ADR stands for. So they have to read the lines and try to time it to what the film so they can embed it into the film. Because, like I said, they got to get rid of that, like a jet went by, or maybe some moron in the back, one of the stage guys drops some tools, you hear hammers falling, that kind of thing. So those things are done post-production to make sure the film is qualified, something that can be distributed when it's all put together. And of course, we talk about video transformed the film industry, making VHS tapes, beta tapes for rent and selling them, keeping some of those classic movies alive as well, besides television. And then DVDs took over, and you can go get Hollywood blockbuster video. There was The Warehouse, and now those businesses are gone, because now everything's online. Netflix, Amazon Prime, you go on the internet and get everything on YouTube now, and movies are on demand on just your basic cable now too, Paramount Plus, Hulu, the list goes on, all kinds of relatable websites we chat about. So, and then we talk about the Motion Picture Code, the MPAA. This is the organization that rates the films. It'd be a G film, a PG film, PG-13, an R film, restricted, and of course, rated X.
As I sit here, Mike, listening to you, I feel like I have my own personal tour guide, that's really kind of taking me on the journey from the beginning to the current. And speaking of Universal Tour Guide, something I did almost a half century ago, which is hard to believe in my mind. Universal Pictures played a big role, still plays a big role in film. I don't believe that's part of your course, isn't it? Universal Pictures.
Yes, Gary, Universal Pictures, boy, I tell you what, they made a lot of headway in the box office in the 30s and the 40s with their collection of horror films, scary films, if you will, Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy, The Wolf Man. They made a lot of money and people were being scared and they were loving it, okay? Let's talk about Dracula. Now, Bela Lugosi, he was not the first choice. It was Lon Chaney Sr. Of course, we know him as the Man of a Thousand Faces. But the problem with Lon Chaney Sr., he got throat cancer and passed away, but he was the first choice to play Dracula because Lon Chaney, nobody really knew what his face looked like for many years because he was so good. He did his own makeup and he played the Phantom of the Opera. He did The Hunchback of Notre Dame and all kinds of interesting silent films. Now, since he didn't get the film because he passed away, Bela Lugosi stepped in because he was doing, like I said, the Broadway stage and the London stage. And then Frankenstein actually was offered to Bela Lugosi, but Bela Lugosi goes, "Oh, there's no creativity," going, "Oh, monster," So Boris Karloff, who was an unknown actor at the time, got that role and also got the role as the Mummy. And Boris Karloff had a supreme career along with Bela Lugosi. And now Lon Chaney Jr., the son of Lon Chaney, was very famous as well. He was the original The Wolf Man, and they did like 2 or 3 sequels. So a lot of great films. And then, of course, in the mid late 50s, the horror genre was kind of escaping, and they were getting into sci-fi films, which we cover that, Gary, as well. A lot of information about the great technology they had for the science fiction films in the old days and current condition. And by the way, sticking to horror for just a second here. Now, Great Britain had their version of horror films called the Hammer horror films. It created some great stars like Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. They did quite a few. Now, the original, by the way, of the Dracula films of the silent film era was Nosferatu. Remember that one?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, great film. And they did
Crooked fingers.
a bio of that particular film called Shadow of the Vampire. Came out, I believe, in the late 90s. Starred William Dafoe and John Malkovich. There was a legend about Nosferatu really being the actor that played him really being a vampire. It's a legend. It's a myth, if you will. So anyway, we cover all that good, the horror films, and since we're at it, let's talk about the genres I'm going to be covering in the particular film here. And Gary, we cover, as we mentioned, the silent film era. We get to the film noir, your favorite, of course, Casablanca, and a lot of great films. Mystery and suspense, Alfred Hitchcock. Oh, my goodness. What a director he was. Oh, God, we can talk about him for hours. Musical genre, the Singing in the Rains and the great films with Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, Gene Kelly. Science fiction, which I just mentioned there. Interracial dramas, great film, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and many others. You mentioned horror films, gangster films, Edward G. Robinson, James Cagney, The Godfather, all kinds of cool gangster topics and subject matter there for that genre. Secret agent spies. Of course, I got a big thing about the James Bond phenomenon. You and I love the Bond era, with Sean
Oh, yes.
Connery, Roger Moore, Pierce Brosnan, Daniel Craig, George Lazenby, and of course Timothy Dalton. But we covered the secret agent films, comedy. Oh, that's our favorite. We talked about Mel Brooks earlier, and then rom-com films, which of course they have another name for the rom-com films. We call them to the ladies chick flicks, and of course Western. Our favorite Westerns. You mentioned yours, I mentioned mine, Tombstone, and of course John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, many others. Disaster films. Irwin Allen, known as the Master of Disaster. We talk about that. We got military films, all kinds of good stuff. Speaking of which, John Wayne's did quite a few military films, and just a list of great actors. Tom Hanks, some of the current, more modern performers. Adventure films, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, biopics from the legends of the film business, and of course, music, sports. Great biopic about Pride of the Yankees, about Lou Gehrig with the great Gary Cooper, another legendary actor. And we do talk about sports films all the way to the Rocky films and animation, the Disney and Warner Brothers. And then we do political based genre type films like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, All the President's Men, The Candidate, and Parallax View. Ever seen the Parallax View?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Have I ever?
Especially with all the stuff going on in politics now. All these films are very relatable. And we got indie films, we'll talk about that. And of course, foreign films are very big around the world. People love these films. They had messages in the film, a lot of mystery, and a lot of real life predicaments. Great Italian films, La Strada, La Dolce Vita, all the Bernardo Bertolucci films, Sergio Leone films, the spaghetti westerns he did with Clint Eastwood. A lot of French films, some great films, A Man and a Woman, tons of other French films, and of course, German films like Das Boot and many others. A lot of these foreign films, the European films, and some of the films from Asia, they set the tone for a lot of American films as well. So we cover that in that particular genre. Then documentary films, very important. Short films. I even have a thing, a Canvas little module about how to produce and direct a short film. So basic information, like just kind of reviewing here. We cover all the Hollywood heavyweights, actors, actresses, directors, producers, all kinds of cool notes.
I tell you what, I wish I could sign up for this class because you folks are in for a real treat. Mike, I'll just wrap up my part here by just sharing two observations about films you've mentioned already. One is Das Boot. When you see Das Boot, you'll be absolutely just flabbergasted as to how claustrophobic you feel because you're on this submarine, which, by the way, is full of Germans, although the film never mentions the word Nazi or Hitler or anything. But I guarantee you will be rooting for these people to survive, even though they were the enemy in World War II. Just a great film, Das Boot. Another film about water that I happen to like, you mentioned Robert Redford before. One of his films that most people don't talk about, it's called All Is Lost. And there's about 3 words spoken in the entire movie. And Robert Redford is just mesmerizing. He's like a 75-year-old man in this film. And it is so good. Mike, I don't even know where to begin. But is there anything else we can add other than the thing I have to ask you? Because you've been in films yourself. But let me just if I can, just to lead you into this, the
Mhm.
one film that I remember that I was, extremely impressed with you on was the Drew Peterson story, where you did that like 2 to 3 minute scene with Rob Lowe. I mean, this is a major star. And even though you were playing a character that obviously you have been a disc jockey, I've been a disc jockey, but I was just so impressed with you on the screen. What was it like working with an actor like that? And it must have been an amazing experience.
Oh yeah, Rob Lowe is fantastic. He's a Chicago Cubs fan, I think, because we sat in makeup together. He was putting on his makeup to become Drew Peterson. He did a great job, by the way, in that role. But it was a great guy. We had some fun stories. But yeah, we I played the disc jockey in that film, and it was yeah, 2 3 minute scene. And some people thought, hey, you should have been nominated for an Emmy, But I didn't know how to put it
Yeah.
together. But no, it was a great role. It was a great time. It was a fabulous biopic, which I think ran on the Lifetime movie channel there for a bit. But that was a great film. And I've worked on a good chunk of films, but maybe not in front of the camera all the time, but maybe mostly you hear my voice in the background. Sometimes you'll see a film where you'll be watching two actors having their own dialogue, but they have the TV set on or the radio on in the background. You'll hear a voice talking, either sportscaster, newscaster, some kind of announcer, commercial actor, whatever, or you'll see me on the screen in the background, very small. And that's and those are great roles because you get paid and you get paid well, you get residuals, the whole thing. But so I worked on a film with Harrison Ford called Firewall. I did a great sports movie called Two for the Money. My voice was heard in the beginning while Matthew McConaughey was a quarterback getting crunched at the goal line, breaking his leg, and I did a play-by-play. So I've done a lot of sports stuff, newscasters, and I've done a handful of films, a lot of video games based on films I've done over the years. I don't want to read my whole resume, but I've done some great work and had some great stories and some good people. I met some really fine people. I did Ray Donovan and met all the main lead actors in that particular show on HBO. It's just a fun time. Just it's a very fun business, but very difficult at times. It's not an easy business. A lot of competition out there, but luckily I've had some good luck and been able to meet some good people and do some fine work and work with some fine production companies.
Well, just to let the audience know, of course, the audience being your students, you are involved in so many voiceover productions. Just, it's often when I say, "Hey, Mike, was that you on that commercial for fill in the blank?" Because you're in so many things. Hey, listen, man, it's been a real treat hanging out with you here. We could just talk on for hours. I know the purpose of this, of course, is to introduce your students
Mhm.
and let them begin to fall in love with the movies if they haven't already. I'm going to let you just kind of wrap it up and take it wherever you want. But first, let me just say thank you. It's been a real pleasure, not only for you as the professional that you are, but just as your friend. It was a real enjoyable to spend a little bit of time with you here. And so thank you.
No, it's been a lot of fun. I do thank you for your time because I know you're very busy and you're a good guy, a good friend, and I appreciate you doing this for me. And let's just kind of wrap it up here. I'll say, future students, you're going to have a good time in the class. We cover a lot of stuff. So if you love the movie business, if you love cinema, you're going to enjoy yourself here. And I think once you enroll and register and you keep up to date with the schedule of the assignments and everything on the website, that's the benefit and the luxury of an online class. It works with your schedule. It's very flexible. So just follow the procedure, follow the line, follow the yellow brick road, as they say from Judy Garland on and the little Munchkins. Is that what they called them? The Munchkins on Wizard of Oz, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. So follow the yellow brick road on the course, and you'll have a great time. And again, Gary, thank you for your time. Gary Butterworth, ladies and gentlemen, media mogul, media rep, great friend, good colleague. And once again, that's it for now. I'm Mike Carlucci, your instructor for Humanities 135, Appreciation of Cinema. In a particular course, we'll offer it either spring, summer, or fall from the Coast District. And Gary, I want to talk about what the students will be responsible for besides all the good information here on the website. Let's talk about the assignments. Certain film genres will be chosen, and the student will become their own Siskel and Ebert, a film critic, if you will, a written critique assignment of those particular genres. We will also slide in a few discussion boards, a quiz or two, final exam, and a big film term paper. Everything we'll cover from film theory to all the classic films and performers we talk about, behind the scenes information, and news stories in the film business, and everything in between. But most of all, I want everyone to enjoy the films we view and talk about, and learning new things about the history of cinema. And once again, welcome to Humanities 135, the appreciation of cinema. Let's have a good semester. It's going to be a lot of fun. Good night for now.
End scene.
Cut. Return to one. Show the package. Little terms, ladies and gentlemen, in the film business. Again, thank you for your time.